Disability, Recruitment and Retention, Part 3. Next is the whole issue of reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation. This is another myth where many people have thought that it's an expensive outlay to reasonably accommodate a person with a disability. It's not necessarily. It's definitely not. Certainly for the blind, I can say that quite openly that we are amongst the most expensive, simply because we do require software and hardware. Sometimes hardware, but almost always software, in order for us to be computer literate. As simple as that. The outlay, though, the law is very clear on reasonable accommodation. It's not the branch. It's not the division. It's not the department. It's the company that needs to show that it cannot afford the reasonable accommodation. That's why it's called reasonable accommodation. The opposite is unjustifiable hardship. And if you can show that you cannot afford it, then you can say, I can't afford it. I can't possibly afford the 10,000 rand for your software. I'm terribly sorry. If you can show that and you can demonstrate it, then fine. But for a bank or an insurance company or a large retailer to openly and categorically deny the application of blind candidates wholesale these days on the grounds that they haven't got sufficient software is a travesty and a joke, I'm afraid. A travesty and a joke. So reasonable accommodation need not necessarily be expensive. Don't confuse accessibility with reasonable accommodation. There's a good chance that your public entrances, etc., should have been made accessible. Not a good chance. You're legally required to make them. Don't now say that you're spending a fortune on the chap because you're making your entire establishment accessible. That's your problem. You should have done that before. You may need to provide desks that go up and down, perhaps, or other small things which may require a capital outlay. That's fine. But access is something you should have looked at a long time ago. Section S of the building regulations have stipulated accessibility since 1987. 1987. The fact that architects and building and property developers ignore Section S is hardly the fault of the persons with disabilities. So reasonable accommodation is something that you do for an individual to ensure that he can, in fact, do the job you expect him to do. The opposite of that, of course, is how productive do you think he's going to be if you don't? So the business case says, of course you need to accommodate him, because if you accommodate him, he's going to be productive. The second clever business case is this, is that if you accommodate him and he's happy and he's productive, he's going to stay there for longer. Turnover is one of the biggest costs of approaching organizations, particularly the call center industry. It is a bit of a myth to say that people with disabilities are always loyal. That's actually not strictly true. You need to tell the difference between loyalty and being stuck. There's a very big difference between being loyal and being stuck. However, regardless of either, the fact is that people with disabilities are not mobile. We do not jump jobs. We do not flit around to any old job simply because it's extraordinarily hard to find a job. And so your retention level of persons with disabilities that you accommodate is infinitely higher than any other equity candidate. Any other equity candidate. So reasonable accommodation is something which makes business sense. And on that note, there's another cartoon which depicts another big mistake that is made, is that you think you're hiring the disability. Now, what the cartoon demonstrates is exactly the same cartoon as the other one, except the individual isn't blind. Now he's in a wheelchair. Same guy facing him. And what he's saying is, he's saying one thing and he's thinking another. What he's thinking is, he's facing this chap with a disability. Once again, there's a great CV facing him. He hasn't once looked at the CV. And what he's thinking is, oh my God, how's he going to get to work? How's he going to get to the toilet? How's he going to get there? How's he going to do this? How's he going to do that? He's panicking. He's thinking the disability. What he says is, I'm really not sure there's a job here for you. Because he's talked himself right out of it. You're not hiring the disability. And here is a little lesson, which we ought to know, but I'm surprised how often it isn't known. And it's the basic rule of competency-based recruitment. There are only two things you ever hire against. Two things, 2 steps. 1, you need to establish the inherent job requirements. What are the inherent job requirements? You're looking for an accountant, then accountant must be it. No guy rocking up and he says, how's it, dude? I'm actually quite numerate, you know. That's not an accountant, okay? You want a guy with a BCom. If you're looking for a driver, then it's a driver's license. Inherent job requirement is something very specific to the requirements of the job. Okay, particularly it usually implies some education or experience. Only then, now you've shortened your list already. Now, and you never consider the disability at the time. It's not your problem. It's nothing to do with you. You're simply assessing whether the individual CV has the inherent requirements of the job. Then you take the next step, which is, can you perform the essential functions of the job? The establishment of the performance of the essential functions of the job. Now, that's where reasonable accommodation gets offered. Right, I realize you're blind. Now, how are you planning on doing this job? Well, actually, I've got this software and that hardware, and I can demonstrate it to you if you like, and that's how we do it. That is where, and that's how you apply. But unfortunately, what's happening is people are applying artificial filters into the reasonable accommodation part. Into the inherent job requirements. So we're seeing nonsense things, and government is a big culprit here. Department of Health was taken to court by Alan Small some years ago because they included a valid driver's license as an inherent requirement of a job for a legal officer. His argument was, do you want a lawyer or do you want a driver? What should have happened was that was not an inherent requirement of the job. A law degree was the inherent requirement of the job because it was for a legal officer. The essential performance of the essential function of the job, they would have said, right, you do need to go from hospital to hospital or from place to place, in which case he would have said, well, I have a driver, or I can find a driver, or you can find me a driver, or I'll borrow I'll bum a ride from a staff member. That's reasonable accommodation. But do you see how quickly you can fall into the trap of seeing the disability? You're not hiring the disability. You're hiring an individual with a skill. And to close, I want to last slide. I've been doing this for a while now, and I've been working at quite high levels in organizations for the last 15 years. And so it's given me some perspective of what the common problems that I see in my clients over the last 15 years. What are the common problems that I can identify which must try and find an answer to? Why is it that we're struggling so much with this disability integration attempt? And the first common problem that I established was that there's very little leadership. There's very little participation at a senior level, executive participation. There's invariably a lack of interest or a withdrawal or simply not participating. That's the first reality, or the first common problem that I've noticed. The second common problem is that initiatives are invariably ad hoc or reactive. How often haven't we been involved in a flurry of activity, a flurry of workshops? I'm sure Ruthen could tell me some stories just like that, where you get involved in projects which are great, but they're ad hoc and they're reactive. So they're little flits of action here and there in the organization. Okay. The third problem is that there's still too much silo activity in organizations. Disability integration is almost always thrown at HR to run with. Here, HR, catch. It's your baby. Nobody else wants to know. CSI doesn't want to know. Operations don't want to know. Marketing doesn't want to know. Listen, it's not my problem. I don't need to be involved. So poor old HR has got to carry this thing and trying to convince the line managers who work in different parts of the company to hire. And because of the silo-oriented mindset, they really struggle. So the rest of the organization is not interested. So as long as we have that, we're going to struggle. Okay? The fourth problem is, and I mentioned it earlier, is that we have far too much unlawful stereotypic activity. We are literally covering our eyes and our ears. We're like the three monkeys. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. We're quite literally sweeping under the carpet blatant unlawful activity in human resources. Blatant unlawful activity in the employment of persons with disabilities. And we are disregarding it. And lastly, we have no sustainability. Very few projects, so except what I'm listening today at DDAT, that sounds pretty sustainable to me. That's an outstanding project, the sound of that. But very few projects are sustainable in companies. there's very little push. And the simple reason is because it's never looked at a proper strategic. There's not a strategic focus to what we're trying to do. I want to end with a story which pretty much wraps up what I've been saying today. Okay, we're seeing an enormous challenge, we believe. And that's one of the reasons why so few companies are actually making any headway. Because they see this thing as an enormous challenge. How on earth are we going to do this? This is just too much. I'm petrified. I don't know what to do. I absolutely don't know what to do next. So here's a story for you. So picture a mental asylum. It's a cross between a hospital and a jail. If those of you can remember One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you're showing your age. But that's what we're looking at, okay? So it's a kind of a mental security environment. And there's two men. Sorry, ladies, but what the hell? There's a man and a woman. I don't really mind, okay. What the hell? There's a man and a woman, right? And they want to get out. They're desperate to get out of this place. They're not having a good time and they want to escape. So the man says to the woman, he says, okay, I've got a plan. We're going to escape. You're going to help me? The woman says, yeah, I'll help you. He says, right, okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I want you to go and I want you to filch food. Start storing some food away for the next week. Pinch some food, go into the pantry, whatever. Hoard your bread. I want you to make sure that when we escape, that we don't starve. Cool, can you do that? Yep, I can do that, she says. And he says, by the way, while you're doing that, get some warm clothes and maybe a blanket or two so that we don't freeze. Can you do that? She says, yep, I can do that. Then she looks at him suspiciously and she says, what are you going to do? He says, no, I'm going to check out the wall. And if I ascertain that the wall is under 6 feet in height, then we'll go over it. But if it's over 6 feet, then we'll go under it. And that's what we'll do. Cool. When should we meet again? He says, a week. We'll meet in a week. A week goes by. And the man and the woman meet furtively in the quad somewhere. And the man says, have you got the food? Have you got the blankets? And she says, yeah, I got the food. I got the blankets. We're not going to starve. We're not going to freeze. And she looks at him and says, have you checked out the wall? Are we going under it? Are we going over it? And he says, I've got bad news. We're stuck here forever. There is no wall. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.